In the dim light of a dusty library, a girl picks up a book that tells the story of a sorcerer named Ike who served in the army of the Demon Lord and was the grandson of Romberg, the master sorcerer. As one of the leaders among those hordes of orcs and monstrous creatures, alongside his assistant Jiron, Ike would charge into enemies with fierce resolve, while hiding a secret from the demons that could cost him not only his prestige as commander of the Immortal Brigade, but also his very life. Inside one of the castles captured by the 7th Battalion, a human commander receives the bitter visit of Ike in his quarters. Facing the defeated human, Ike presents 3 options. The first is to surrender and hand over all his territory. The second is to die by his own hand in an act of honor. Lastly, the commander can flee through the window while the demon pretends to admire the scene of annihilation outside. Ironically, the human thanks his enemy for the mercy, but states that none of the options are sufficient for him. As expected, the man attacks the opposing leader, who retaliates with a single spell that ends the battle. Ike then orders Jiron to tend to the defeated commander's wounds, as well as those of his soldiers who surrendered. Observing the war from afar through a magical sphere, a sorceress notes that it took only a week for the brigade to conquer Asahi, an undeniable proof of the commanding talent behind the victory. With his scepter in hand, Ike conjures a magical barrier at the battle's end. Gazing upon the scene of devastation, he cannot help but feel guilty for wounding so many people, knowing he will never get used to the blood and violence of war. After all, Ike was never a demon, but shares the race targeted by his brutal offensives, human. His teacher Romberg was a great sorcerer with vast wisdom, who understood everything about the advanced civilization that once thrived in this world. On a whim, he decided to take in and raise Ike, a human child, and taught him all his knowledge and magic. In his last words, the sage asked Ike never to speak of the lost civilization, as such a revelation would one day bring countless disasters. As a burden to keep this secret, Ike could never remove the cloak and mask he must wear to hide his true identity, for Romberg knew the Demon Lord would never forgive Ike's humanity. Years later, after conquering Asahi, Ike surrounds the room with a powerful barrier, granting him control over who could enter. At least that was the plan. To his surprise, a young maid had been hiding under the office desk. Begging for her life, the girl swears she saw nothing of what happened, but her desperate clumsiness seemed more hostile to her survival than the powerful enemy sorcerer. After 20 years of keeping his secret, Ike had been discovered by a hapless human who had knocked herself out on the desk. Later, walking among the ruined halls of that civilization, Jiron fears that too many humans have been left alive. In his defense, Ike argues that a dead man cannot pay taxes, nor can he keep the machinery of Asahi running, a city renowned for its highly developed commerce. Speaking of which, a little further along, surrendered residents want to know how much they owe in taxes to the Demon Lord. To the workers' delight, the sorcerer informs them that the rate will remain the same, but warns that anyone who resists this demand will be punished exemplarily. Suddenly, Ike is summoned without his consent to a chamber where a gigantic golem attacks him. Realizing what's happening, the sorcerer comments to his commander that she promised not to teleport him without warning. Ignoring her subordinate, the mage watches the confrontation in silence. Not taking it lightly, Ike wields his scepter to unleash the slashing attack against the enemy, destroying the golem. Having done this, his superior recalls the little boy who used to hide behind his grandfather, the master sorcerer Romberg. Now Ike was strong enough to defeat a creature she believed could rival him. However, Zephyr, the commander of the 7th Battalion, not only understood the current power of the mage, but was also the only demon who knew his secret. As flamboyant as ever, she informs Ike that Darakutan wishes to see him personally, making him the first brigade leader to receive such an honor. Thus, she will take him to the Demon Lord's castle immediately. Meanwhile, the maid wakes up after fainting from the blow to her head. Not understanding what is happening, she is prevented from leaving the room by the magical barrier, so she turns her eyes back to the room until she finds a portion of food with a note. The message asks the girl to eat and keep quiet, which she does not comprehend at first, but hunger makes her devour the food. Returning to Ike standing before that castle surrounded by miasma, the dark mass affects the human's body, as it always has, regardless of how many years he has been in contact with every corner of the demon territory. As if that weren't enough this time, he would undergo an evaluation to meet the Demon Lord, which could reveal his true identity. However, to prevent this, Zephyr casts a spell spell that promises to maintain the man's disguise. Then, before the commander responsible for inspecting the castle, Ike exudes extraordinary power, prompting the inspector to comment that he expected nothing less from Romberg's grandson. With this, Ike gains access to Doberberg, the demon lord's enormous castle, built to express the vast influence and power of the lord. The corridors are vast and endless, giving the human mage the impression that the supreme leader's importance is just as immense. However, the clear disadvantage of this extensive path is the fact that it tires humans like Ike, who envies his commander's flying ability as she glides through the fortress's corridors without feeling the weight of her steps. Even though he can use this spell, Ike does not control it, as well as Zephyr managing only to leap to great heights instead of gracefully floating without tiring his legs in long walks like the demon does. So after some time, the commander of the Immortal Brigade finally arrives in the throne room of the current demon lord. At the forefront of the hordes, Derakuten was responsible for turning the tide of war against humanity with just one battle. And this reputation makes both enemies and allies fear the coldness and cruelty of this demon, known for executing anyone he considers incompetent, even if they are on his side in the trenches of conflict. On the other hand, Derakuten knows how to best use those who show real talent, and this ability is the hallmark that ensured the demon lord a true revolution in combat methods during his reign. After all, monsters are born and grow up being extremely individualistic, which has always led to endless disputes among them throughout history. However, Derakuten turned the tables by instilling a sense of unity in his troops never seen before, and Ike is about to understand the reason behind this invaluable reputation of the leader. Thus, he bows before the Dark Lord, a young girl who surprises the commander with an appearance that gives an impression of a certain fragility. Derakuten mentions the conquest of the powerful fortress city of Arsenam in just 1 week, and Ike gives all the credit to his superior Saphiro, prompting Derakuten to remark that such humility sounds almost human. This comment sends a chill down the man's spine, so his commander steps in to clarify that she brought the grandson of Romberg, whom everyone called the Guardian of Hell. This information calms the accusatory tone of the demon lord, who understands that this young man's modesty must have come from his grandfather. Speaking of modesty, the Dark Lord emphasizes that Arsenam was taken with almost no loss of life, making Ike think he should have listened to Jiron about killing some prisoners. He quickly considers the best response to justify the lack of bloodshed in the fortress city's battle, arguing that humans may fear terror, but they will never obey it, and history itself proves this. When comparing the productivity of cities where the leaders were executed with those where they remained active, the better approach becomes clear. Without moving a muscle in his face during this speech, Derakuten asks if this is how Romberg thought, which his grandson confirms. With that said, even though he has exchanged few words with the demon lord, Ike has a strange certainty that she knows ancient civilization just like his master, because only knowledge of this level could revolutionize the demon army. Next, Derakuten approaches the servant and considers him different from the other demons who have bloodlust in their eyes. Therefore, next time the Dark Lord wants to look directly at the commander's face to know what kind of thirst this eccentric sorcerer hides behind the mask. With that said, she leaves the throne room. Thus, the human feels brutally relieved, sensing that he could be discovered at any moment, and removes the mask to take a deep breath. With a smile on her face, Saphiro comments that it's not like the man to seem so tense, and he responds that the Lord knew it was a mask, which made him fear immediately. Regardless, his commander reminds him that the human's identity remains preserved, and that's what matters. She informs him that Derakuten gave Ike a reward, which could be seen as a punishment depending on the point of view. Following that, he teleports back to the commander's room in Arsenam, where the portion of food he had left had been devoured by the maid, who slept like a log after eating. Ike kicks the chair where the girl was napping, waking her up with the same fear as last time, pleading not to be killed. Then Ike calms the girl down, saying he won't kill her, and asks for her name to break the ice. The maid says her name is 13, which the mage finds peculiar. However, she explains that servants are called by numbers, and her birth name is Sadie, like that French classical pianist. Some people confuse it with 7, which is not got her number, but the correct pronunciation is Sadie, which is not a number at all and sounds much fancier. Regardless, Ike spares the poor girl by making her his servant. In the next scene, the mage is congratulated by Jiron for becoming the Lord of Avelias, the land at the southernmost border of Arsenom. According to Saphiro earlier, this is the demon lord's gift to the victorious commander, who now has the opportunity to be on the front line against humans. And since Ike is a lover of taxes, the supreme leader demands that the officer double the tax revenue in the region that sits in the eye of the hurricane in the middle of a war. Curiously, it was the demons who devastated this god-forsaken territory, and now Ike will have to figure out how to rebuild the small town of Avelias, which would take about 6 months, since the place is on the border and will be the target of frequent attacks the population, and the army already begin to feel the influence of the new ruler, who orders humans and demons to work together to rebuild the structures, which would reduce the reconstruction time to just 1 month. Jiron despises the fact that he has to cooperate with this race, especially since the men receive overtime as an incentive. However, the orc acknowledges that his commander's methods are strange, but they earn the title of ruler for the mage, who also gets his hands dirty alongside the workers and is already being recognized by all the local people. In fact, on further reflection, Jiron praises Ike so much that he sees the sorcerer as the future demon lord himself. In the next scene, another battle between humans and demons unfolds, where mages try to hold off the endless hordes invading their territory. One of them thinks it's enough to hurl multiple fire spells as a team hitting the rows of monsters. However, these evil beings appear unscathed even after enduring such high-level magic. In no time, the city walls are breached, and the two forces clash physically, with the demons gaining the upper hand over the humans, as has been frequently happening. In the Demon Lord's castle, Daracuten receives news that the war against Rosaria is going well, but this region plans to form alliances with neighboring countries to mount a stronger resistance. Observing the tendency of humans to unite in the face of difficulty, the Lord decides to leave this problem in Ike's hands. While handling Avelias' bureaucratic matters, the sorcerer receives tea from his newest maid Sadie, who is worried that her master is tired. Politely, the man accepts the gesture and keeps his focus on his tasks. On the other side of the trench, Alistair, leader of the Order of the White Rose Knights, is summoned to retake Avelias, as her superior deems the loss of that territory humiliating and believes it is high time to stop letting the enemies underestimate humans. Meanwhile, in some alley of Avelias, a trickster promises to double the bet for anyone who can guess under which cup the ball is hidden, the typical scam game. With nothing else to do, Sadie decides to take a guess and points to one of the cups. But since she has no money to bet, the game master gets irritated and yells at her. However, upon seeing the good heart the girl has between her shoulders and belly, he suggests she bet something else instead of money, maybe something more physical. But before anything can happen, some spell lifts all 3 cups simultaneously, revealing that the ball was under none of them, causing those who lost money in the scam to demand retribution through violence. In the midst of this, Ike appears in the crowd without his disguise, stating he is on a mission to infiltrate among humans and observe them as enemies. Finding his servant, he orders her to follow him, and as some Avelia's troops patrol the city streets in a strange formation, the mage comments that the story about the king's alliance seems true. Sadie asks what that is, and he explains it is an ancient alliance where countries unite in times of danger, setting aside their individual interests to prioritize the common good. This alliance has been activated 3 times in the past, and each time the Demon Lord was defeated with his forces pushed back to the depths of Doderberg. Curiously, his maid becomes downcast upon hearing this, prompting Ike to ask why she is sad about a possible human victory. She reveals that in human society, a slave is always a slave, so if Ike disappears, the girl will likely end up on the streets, becoming a bargaining chip for some servant trader. Hearing this, Ike comforts her, saying that the current Demon Lord is the strongest and wisest in history, ensuring their victory is certain. After speaking, he reflects that both humans and demons have numerous problems and wonders if there is any way to change this once and for all. Suddenly, the scammer from the cup game returns to confront Sadie, accusing her of performing the trick that lifted the cups. Beside him, a gigantic brute ready to teach the meddler a lesson. Sadie argues that the man cheated, but he doesn't care about that. He just wants to recover his loss, be it money or whatever the girl can offer beyond that. Without being invited into the conversation, realization, Ike looks around and sees no one else nearby. Thus, he freezes the brute's legs and summons sharp ice lances that float in the air, poised for the men's first abrupt move. Next, he tries to question the scammer, but the man wouldn't shut up for even a second, so the mage drives a lance into his arm to convince him to be quiet. Ike then mentions the agitation of the local army and wants to know what the soldiers are talking about. The scammer tries to convince the mage that he knows nothing, but Ike threatens him once more, this time with death. With nowhere to run, the man informs that the king's alliance is about to be formed by neighboring countries to fight the demons, and that Rosaria's army plans to attack the demon lord's forces before this alliance is sealed. Ike interprets this move by Rosaria as an attempt to expand its influence within the alliance, granting the country more prestige before the war table is set, which will give them more voice in strategic decisions. On the other hand, of course, if Rosaria fails, it will leave that region in a very delicate situation. Finally, the man reveals that Avelias will be the target of this offensive because the gates are destroyed and the city is poorly defended. Having obtained the information he wanted, Ike turns and leaves the two men trapped in the ice. Returning to his office, the Lord of Avelias is surprised by a visit from Lilith, an old friend who complains about not finding her companion anywhere. Ike explains that he was exploring Rosaria in search of valuable information and was about to reveal it to her, but she interrupts by asking who the woman beside the commander is. As soon as Sadie introduces herself, Lilith calls her ugly and demands the sorcerer relinquish this human, declaring that she will be his maid instead. Moreover, she makes it clear that Sadie must never flirt with the master. Mockingly, Sadie retorts, asking how that could be possible since she is supposedly ugly. Additionally, she says she was legitimately chosen to be Ike's servant. This said, Lilith loses her patience, and the two start a fight just as Jiron arrives and notices the brawl in the office. At the end of the afternoon, doing their best to avoid making noise, the troops of Rosaria gather around Avelias to launch a surprise attack. One of the soldiers involved in the operation notes that the silence is eerie, and so far not a single local guard has been seen anywhere. Soon enough, the catapults are ready for the attack, but just as they receive the order to fire, the humans are taken aback by skeletons rising from the ground and goblin archers lying in wait in the mountains. Realizing his troops are being quickly overrun, Alistair orders his soldiers to retreat. From atop the walls of Avelias, Jiron comments to Ike that the enemy commander's decision was wise, all thanks to the espionage efforts of their master. However, not everything went as planned, and hidden high within the city's structures, a mysterious archer shoots the mage in the back, knocking him down instantly. Later, upon hearing the news of the White Rose Knight's retreat, the superior officer of Rosaria is outraged and orders the arrest of the commander. The soldier receiving the order questions the decision, noting that Alistair is one of the nation's best generals, and this will impact the army's morale. Nevertheless, the officer makes it clear he doesn't care because he needs to uphold his honor by punishing the one responsible for the failure, as this is the only way he will have credit with the king. Meanwhile, Ike wakes up in his bed bandaged and without his disguise, with Saphiro lying beside him. The boy asks what's going on, and the sorceress questions if this is how he talks to the person who just saved his life. Moreover, to further confuse the boy, she points out that he groped her quite eagerly the previous night. After the initial shock, Ike seems to remember nothing of what happened, so Saphiro explains that she healed him from an arrow wound. Aside from that, she mentions that no humans were killed during the battle, and she wants to know what Ike will do if the demon lord suspects him again. Without giving a direct answer, the man says he intends to make humans and demons live together, and that no one will take that idea out of his head. Unsure of how to respond, Saphiro leaves after reminding Ike that he is human and should rest. Alone, the mage examines the arrow that was shot at him and wonders if someone has infiltrated his troops. Shortly after, he quickly puts his disguise back on because Lilith arrives, happy to see the commander is better. Behind her, Sadie shows the same joy, so the demon starts to hiss at her again, trying to make the human keep her distance. Sadie takes the bait, and the two start round 2 until Jiron throws Lilith out and stands in front of the door to keep her from coming back in. Sadie thanks him, calling the orc Mr. Ugly, which offends him, so Ike corrects her, saying the pig isn't that ugly, just has a rustic face and a chubby body out of the ordinary. That said, the master asks Jiron to locate the commander of the White Rose Knights. Sometime later, after his loyal assistant completes his espionage work, the commander of the Immortal Brigade is informed that Alistair was imprisoned after failing the attack on Avelias, so he heads to the prison where she is. is. To further annoy the man, Lilith once again interferes, making jokes about terrible humans being in that tower. So Ike loses his patience with her and warns that he didn't call for anyone. Persistent, she replies that being alone is too boring, so the mage relents once more as long as the demon keeps quiet. Satisfied, Lilith follows along with her head resting on the poor man's shoulder. Upon reaching the prison gate, the monster remarks that it's easy to get in since there are few guards, but Ike wants to cause as little commotion as possible, acting stealthily. However, in the middle of this, Lilith knocks out the guards, clearing the way. Once inside, the prison is enormous, much larger than Ike had imagined. For this reason, he assumes it will take some time to find the human commander. But Lilith beats her chest again and resolves the situation by knocking out another guard, stealing the key, and getting the information that the prisoner is on the top floor. The mage questions the part about not causing trouble, but doesn't have the patience to scold his companion again, so he continues without saying anything. Suddenly, the situation worsens when other soldiers arrive and attack the two without hesitation. As calm as ever, Lilith hands the keys to her partner and asks him to go ahead while she deals with the problem. For the last time, Ike insists that she doesn't shed unnecessary blood, and in the blink of an eye, she has fractured 14 of the opponent's bones. Ike pretends not to see anything and continues his journey. Upon reaching the mentioned cell, he turns the key and opens the door, but no one is inside. Confused, Ike takes a few steps forward to analyze the situation, and then the prisoner appears behind him, almost hitting him with a dagger. Without wasting time, the mage strikes the woman down. After that, she asks what he wants, assuming the demon only came to laugh at a defeated enemy. Without falling for the provocation, Ike directly asks if the commander sent an infiltrator to Avelia's to kill him. Alistair doesn't answer and instead questions if Ike is really a demon. Not understanding why the mage asks what she means, but several guards rush up the stairs upon discovering the invader has reached Commander Alistair's cell. Taking advantage of the intruder's distraction, the woman points the knife at his neck and considers that he might be human for some reason. Holding the wizard hostage, she insists on asking if he is human or not, taking Ike outside the cell as the guards arrive. In response, the commander of the Immortal Brigade freezes time and pushes the guards away with magic. Suddenly, a huge soldier attacks him by surprise. Ike dodges the blow and destroys the floor beneath his opponent, causing him to fall from the top floor of the enormous prison. However, before he falls, Ike casts a spell to cushion the fall and prevent his death. Watching the scene, Alistair wonders why this guy saved the soldier. Unable to move, the officer ends up falling due to the collapsing floor beneath her, but once again, Ike prevents another human's death. Frightened by falling into his lap, Alistair jumps up to stand again, and the wizard tries to calm things down by formally introducing himself. Impressed by his credentials, the woman is amazed to be in the presence of the ruler who defended Avelia's so effectively. Answering the officer's earlier question, Ike says he cannot be human since he commands demonic forces, and soon questions if she sent someone to execute him. Alistair remains undaunted and asserts that she is a knight of the kingdom and will not reveal anything to the demon. If he wants to end her life, so be it. Ike had another plan in mind, so he approaches her to read her mind. Lilith arrives distracted and asks what kind of shamelessness this is. Receiving no response, she says that the guy can have some fun with her instead of this boring human, but Ike ignores the demon until he finishes what he was doing, then turns and leaves. Unsatisfied, Alistair orders the commander to stop and asks what he came there for, to which Ike replies that she need not worry because apparently it has nothing to do with the attempted execution he suffered. The woman argues that she said nothing, so Ike explains that he read her mind and saw nothing suspicious. Finally, he advises the woman to focus on what needs to be done after the defeat they suffered, as that is the most important thing. With that, he distances himself from the confused woman. Lilith invites the boss to relax somewhere before heading home, but the man declines the offer and enters a portal he just created. Upon arriving home, Ike presents Sadie with a portion of rice he bought in the capital plazas, and she asks why. He recalls being told to double the city's taxes and emphasizes that Avelia's has very fertile soil with wheat, as the main crop, although rice is much more productive. Sadie shows she doesn't understand where the young man is going with this, so he elaborates that they could cultivate much more rice in the city, as more productive food could free up some farmers to take on other roles, such as joining the army or participating in construction projects. With a greater balance in the division of labor, the city could evolve much faster. As a result, Ike could double taxes without affecting the population's quality of life, while also bringing progress to the region. To symbolize the beginning of this transformation, the ruler asks Sadie to cook the rice he brought, but she has no idea how to do it, having never seen this food before. Ike doesn't know either, but tells the girl to figure it out. All he knows about it is a phrase he once heard: first low, then high, don't lift the lid even if the baby cries. Without understanding any of it, the maid asserts she will do her best. Later, Ike finds the army assembled, and Jiron is curious about why he was ordered to gather everyone. Ike responds that he will know soon enough. Analyzing the attempt on his life, the commander reflects that the arrow someone fired belonged to the enemy army, but Alistair, who was the leader of the attackers, knew nothing about it. This means someone attacked Ike intending to incriminate the Knights of the White Rose, the worst-case scenario he had imagined, as it certainly indicates a spy in his army. Given the facts, he reads the minds of all his warriors, while Jiron admires the boss and his absolute power, eager for him to read even more of his mind. Among the troops, a goblin sweats, nervously fearing discovery. At the same moment, Ike teleports in front of him and accuses the soldier. By nightfall, the commander visits Zephyr after a long time away, a fact the woman makes sure to comment on. Despite being accustomed to seeing his superior bathing, he prefers to wait outside until she is ready. Before leaving the bathroom, she asks if he found the spy, to which he replies it is the second in command of the 7th Battalion, the one-eyed goblin Jace. Zephyr isn't surprised, as she already had her suspicions. Almost lamenting the betrayal, Ike adds that Jace is very intelligent and a veteran warrior. Thus, Zephyr rises from the bath and asserts that this traitor must pay a high price. Among his comrades, the one-eyed creature is informed by his subordinate that the commander visited Zephyr. Jace asks the shooter if he messed everything up since Ike is still alive, but the archer assures him that he pierced the target's chest. Another comrade informs the boss that he cannot contact the Immortal Brigade spy, so Jace deduces he was discovered, thus planning to strike first to avoid being caught off guard. However, as if that weren't enough, Jace is informed by a third ally that Ike himself has come to see him. Upon arrival, the goblin comments that the commander made a point of coming alone. Ike notes that the goblin decided to do the opposite with dozens of soldiers behind him. Therefore, he wants to know if Jace plans to start a war. Jace responds that this is his territory and none of the commander's business. Moreover, he mentions that Ike was injured in the last battle and believes this is due to the commander becoming too confident, which made him careless and unacceptable behavior for the leader of a brigade. As the goblin spoke, his soldiers were steadily closing in on the human. Without losing his calm, Ike agreed with Jace's point of view, because indeed he needed to be more cautious, especially concerning potential traitors. Realizing he had been discovered, Jace smirked and asked what Ike planned to do alone, even though the goblin's one-eyed army was twice the size of the city's military contingent. Moreover, the entire army was eager to taste the blood of the commander. Looking around, Ike was pleased to see all the traitorous soldiers gathered, as it allowed him to kill hundreds of birds with one stone. The method he used was a meteor shower that dispersed the troops. From the dark sky above, Saphiro chanted the spell to keep the flames falling from behind the clouds. However, causing devastation in Avelias was not part of the plan, so Ike tried to shield himself, while regretting involving the sorceress in his plans again, as the idea was to contain the power to minimize the destruction of structures. Then Saphiro ordered her skeleton troops to destroy the enemies mercilessly, while Ike appeared directly behind Jace, offering him two options: surrender peacefully now or surrender after losing everything. Jace chose option C, sending his minions after the mage. Without difficulty, Ike repelled the enemy forces with his vast array of spells, leaving no chance for his opponents to even touch him. As the soldiers advanced toward their target, Jace hid behind a rock, even as his subordinates called for their leader's presence. According to Jace, his servant's job was merely to buy time for his escape. With this in mind, he fled over the city's structures, promising to make Saphiro pay. A huge creature tried to stop the goblin with a punch that sank the roof of a house, but Jace had his tricks to avoid capture, like a smoke bomb that allowed him to evade the giant. Once no one was around, he entered a secret passage leading directly outside the city away from the battle. Confident he had successfully escaped, Jace turned toward the conflict's debris and acknowledged that he had lost this battle, but that the war was just beginning. However, Ike appeared to thwart the goblin's plans, once more nearly hitting him with a fireball. Jace questioned how the commander knew where he was, since only he knew of that path, and Ike explained that his familiar had followed the traitor. Furious, Jace crushed the familiar with his hand and demanded how the mage dared to stand in his way, but Ike seemed unconcerned with the dangers involved. Calmly, he asked the traitor to surrender, but the goblin was willing to take the confrontation to the bitter end. Full of himself, he punched the mage's magical shield while arrogantly announcing his credentials as the vice commander of the 7th Battalion. As a mere punch was no match for the sorcerer's magical shield, Ike counterattacked by binding the traitor. Ironically, Jace remarked that the demon army held Commander Ike in high esteem and that the goblin had always known the mage had immense talent with unmatched sorcery and intelligence. Reflecting on this, Jace proposed that the two commanders take over the demon lord's army together, since they had spent their lives fighting humans, but on the other hand, the demon lord had never done anything for them. Following demonic instincts, making humans obey and suffer was what brought the greatest joy, but the current lord did not allow her troops to kill without a justified reason, and many members of the army were dissatisfied with this. According to Jace, it seemed that Darrow-Cutin lacked the firm hand necessary to lead such dark forces, and sometimes gave the impression that she didn't even want the position. Thus, they would be doing a favor by dethroning the current ruler, which is why Jace wished for the commander to join them. After the speech, Ike refused the proposal without a second thought, and anticipating this, Jace threw a kunai at his superior. Dodging the blade, Ike froze time again and dismissed the goblin's ridiculous escape attempt. Moreover, Jace had mentioned joining them, so Ike asked if anyone else was aiding the goblin. Jace refused to speak, so Saphiro appeared to torture the traitor until he talked, pulling at his limbs' bindings. Ike asked his superior not to interfere as he wanted to use his own methods, but the sorceress could not tolerate the subordinate's delay in doing what was necessary. With that said, the spy began to show signs of poisoning, prompting Ike to use his antidote spell, but to no avail. This meant Jace had been poisoned by his own comrades, which to Ike was the worst crime possible. Saphiro used Jace's companion's disdain for him to make the goblin talk, as there was no need to stay silent for those who betrayed him. Besides, she assured him that she would avenge him if he revealed who cooperated in the espionage. Jace gave the name of the responsible party before losing his life, and Ike admitted that he felt sorry for the goblin upon seeing him die abandoned, making him think that this feeling of empathy would bring problems someday. After the entire incident, the commander of the Immortal Brigade was summoned by the Demon Lord along with Saphiro, who reported that the mastermind behind the plot was the head of the 3rd Battalion Bastio. Darrow-Cutin demanded proof, so the sorceress explained that Bastio had dragged Jace to his side and was plotting the deaths of the 3 present in the throne room. After hearing Saphiro, the ruler asked for the word of a 4th element who appeared in the room, surprising the 7th Battalion commanders. It was Bastio defending himself by arguing that these two killed the vice commander themselves to frame him because they want to steal the 3rd Battalion for themselves. After all, Saphiro is a witch, and that's something you would expect from one. Upon hearing this insult, Saphiro instinctively exudes her magical power, but Darrow-Cutin asks everyone to calm down. The Lord emphasizes that the more power a demon has, the more they seek. Wealth, glory, influence. This ambition is what makes demons who they are, so it wouldn't make sense for the leader to kill her subordinates for displaying such behavior, otherwise there would be no one left. Having said that, she questions Bastio if he thought she wouldn't uncover the plot he had planned, which surprises the Headless Knight. As for the witch, the Demon Lord acknowledges that her loyalty is true, but says she was responsible for not maintaining the loyalty of her own subordinates. For this reason, both Saphiro and Bastio must be punished according to the code of laws, but Darrow-Cutin doesn't want to lose both commanders in the midst of a war, so she decrees that the situation be resolved through a duel where the winner will be the owner of the truth, because that is how demons should resolve their problems. Later, after receiving the details of the fight, Saphiro explains to Ike that the duel will be conducted with magical creatures known as puppet soldiers. Each commander will represent their army of 50 puppets, but cannot participate in the fight. The commander who defeats defeats all the enemy's puppets wins, and the loser will be executed. Ike questions why something so complicated since a direct combat would be simpler, but apparently Darokuten wants to test the command abilities of her officers. According to Sephiroth, the Demon Lord is a really strange being, but that's not the most eccentric part of the duel. Actually, it is allowed for the commander to choose a substitute to duel in their place, which is why Sephiroth chooses Ike. Indignant Ike emphasizes that the commander's life is in danger, so she should ensure victory herself, but she responds that she decided on the strategy with the highest probability of winning because Ike has already surpassed her in strength. Saying this, she takes her subordinate's hand and entrusts her life to him. Now analyzing the pieces he will have at the time of the confrontation, Ike wishes he hadn't been put in such a delicate position because the burden is immense. By his side, the loyal Jiron asks if everything is okay because the leader has been too quiet, and Ike confesses that he was reflecting on how their battalion's commander is as eccentric as the Demon Lord herself. The orc laughs and agrees, but notes that Ike is no different with his habit of asking subordinates not to kill without reason. Be that as it may, the human was chosen for the fight, and since the facts are already on the table, all that remains is for him to think of a strategy. Jiron complains about the ugly faces of the puppets, and would love to know how to make them fight. According to what was told to Sephiroth's representative in the combat, these puppets follow commands to the letter. Since they all have the exact same strength, the only test is purely command skill. As for the weapons presented in the room, they can be used freely. After that, he goes straight to his office desk to analyze combat strategies, but so far nothing useful has come to mind. Taking advantage of Sadie coming to serve tea, the commander asks her what is the best way to win a battle. Obviously, the maid doesn't know what to say, so Ike keeps provoking a response. He sets up a hypothetical scene where the girl needs to get into a fight, but she cuts him off, saying she prefers to solve her problems with tea rather than with fighting. Ike agrees that this is the best way, but notes that there are people in the world who will force you to fight whether you want to or not. Considering this, he asks how she would fight if necessary, and she says she would use a broom to defend herself, but isn't sure if it would be a good weapon choice. To her surprise, Ike agrees with the maid's viewpoint because a weapon that allows attacking without approaching the enemy is a good choice. A sword is longer than a dagger, and a spear is longer than a sword. Finally, a bow and arrow provide a longer range attack than all the others combined. Distance attack without putting oneself in danger in a fight is always an intelligent strategy, but every worthy opponent is fully aware of this. Sadie comments that her master in Arsenal was passionate about crossbows, and Ike agrees they are easier to use than a bow and also penetrate armor effectively, but that still isn't enough. Just like all the weapons mentioned, the crossbow is well known to everyone, and what Ike needs is something that surprises the enemy. Thinking about this, he considers building firearms, something Sadie doesn't know what it is, so she asks if they are powerful weapons. The commander explains that this is the type of equipment that can be used to hit an opponent hundreds of miles away without allowing for a counterattack. The maid is impressed but doesn't know how the leader will get access to such strong products, so he tells her that the 7th Battalion commander is a very talented alchemist and will surely tell him that there is nothing she cannot do. Upon arriving at Sephiroth, he hears that there are things she cannot do. The human complains that his boss always has this arrogant face and claims she can move mountains, but she replies that she is no deity. Moreover, she has no idea what a firearm is. Losing patience, Ike explains, it's an iron cylinder with gunpowder inside that explodes to propel a projectile. But since the witch is tired of this nerdy talk, she splashes water on her subordinate's face and asks him to join her in the water. Meanwhile, Bastio is also making his preparations for the duel. That night, he learns that Ike will be sent to fight in place of Sephiroth, leading the messenger to believe that she is afraid of his boss. However, Bastio points out that the witch is the commander of the 7th Battalion, so it would be naive to assume she doesn't have a plan. With that said, he praises the sword he's holding, and his subordinate explains that it is made from the fangs of a black dragon and can cut through anything, which is why he will have enough made for all the puppets. However, Bastio desires more than just that. At that moment, an orc arrives after completing a mission, and informs the leader that victory is certain. At the same time, Ike steps out of the bath after tirelessly reflecting on the situation he's caught up in. He doesn't want to believe that Saphiro sent him knowing her life is at risk. Suddenly, in the midst of his reflections, Darrokutin appears and sees him without his demon armor, so the boy bows in desperation, hoping she doesn't realize he is Ike since she has never seen him without a mask. Without saying another word, she orders the man to untie a cloth bundle he was carrying. Upon doing so, he sees various firearms. The demon calls out Ike's name, asking if this is what he was looking for, and the commander tries to pretend that's not his name. But she informs him that there is no need to hide anymore because Romberg had already told her that he passed all his knowledge and magic to the human child. Incredulous, Ike asks why he wasn't killed before, and she reveals that despite being extremely powerful, no power is enough without the right allies. Darrokutin seeks people to fight for her to make possible the world she envisions and desires, and believes that Ike is an important addition to her side in the trenches. Observing the weapons provided by the Lord, Ike dares not refuse such a request, so the supreme leader of the demons withdraws. Without wasting time, Ike presents the firearms to Saphiro and asks her to make lead projectiles, to which the witch conjures one that could be a cannonball. Ike comments that she should know that this thing is too big to fit in such a small barrel, but the mage is annoyed at having to do more precise work because this kind of thing ruins her skin. Internally, Ike reflects that this woman must not realize she will die if he loses the fight. At that moment, a hole is blown in the wall by an explosion and a demon emerges from the smoke, coughing profusely. It was Fiorentina, one of Ike's servants, who had created what her boss requested, even though she didn't know exactly what it was. She doesn't understand how sulfur, when mixed with charcoal and saltpeter, could cause an explosion, so Ike explains that this is the concept of gunpowder. Next, Saphiro constructs appropriate ammunition for the firearm, and Ike asks her to reproduce 500 of these projectiles. However, as this type of work harms her skin, the mage asks Fiorentina to handle it. Jiron offers to help with determination, but Ike and the servant ask the orc to stay out of it. The next day, the duel is finally about to begin, and the arena is filled with monsters and demons who eagerly and bloodthirstily watch the combat. From the highest part of the arena, Darrokutin watches the preparations from her throne, while Bastio laughs at Ike for coming to the war with only shields while his puppets have complete armor. Observing the enemy's equipment, Ike asks if Bastio's puppets are holding Damascus steel, which is confirmed by the enemy. It is the strongest of all metals, so tough that it cannot be penetrated by arrows or spears. According to Bastio, this was a gift from the demon lord. Hearing this, the sorcerer looks up to where Darrokutin is and remembers when she said he would be important by her side in the war trenches. Since he was also given a gift, the commander supposes that all she wanted was to offer a fair fight and that there are no favorites in this dispute. At the same time, the lord might be testing Ike by pitting him against such a formidable opponent. Then the event announcer declares the duel start. Bastio orders his archers to fire, killing some puppets who didn't shield themselves in time. Next, the commander of the 3rd Battalion orders his spearmen to advance, and more of the human leader's puppets fall on the battlefield. Holding only shields, the dolls merely defend against the attacks until they can no longer, hence being defeated one by one without a chance to retaliate. Bastio laughs and taunts the enemy to react because the way things are going is boring. Ike doesn't respond to the insult until a gunshot echoes around the arena. The shot kills Bastio's puppet without ceremony, making the commander realize the situation has changed. Soon a line of shooters forms in the rear and opens fire on the opponents, driving Bastio mad with confusion over the enemy's equipment. Not knowing how to react, the 3rd Battalion leader's puppets are slaughtered until none remain. After the fight, Darrokutin approaches the defeated commander and offers him two options. The first is to take his own life for an honorable death, and the second is to be killed by the demon lord herself. The knight chooses a third alternative, one worthy of a demon. With that, the orc archer who had set the trap alongside Bastio shoots at Darrokutin, but she catches the arrow effortlessly. What she didn't expect was that the arrow had an explosive attached to it, which detonates, engulfing everyone nearby. Additionally, other explosives around the arena go off, devastating the packed stands, while the 3rd Battalion launches an ambush and Bastio declares himself the new demon lord.